Hey, so this video is going to take you through creating part one of the 2019 graphic communication assignment. That's for hire, which is this component here. And we've also got this exploded isometric that helps us understand it a little bit better. So I guess the key thing to do before you always start is to make sure you properly understand the drawing, that you've read all the little annotations, that you've looked at the dimensions and properly understood where everything's got to go, and that you have a clear picture of the shape of it in your head. So as we can see, this object here has a kind of a rectangular profile at the front, and would appear to have a rectangular profile at the back, but we can see that from the front to the back it slopes up, and also from this area that it gets narrower. We can see that there are these kind of details at the back here, which are kind of cylindrical tubes that are spaced equally across the center here. And we've got some dimensions here that indicate to us the central hole, like the actual hole that goes through, is tangent to the back edge of this piece here. So the outer circle needs to kind of overlap with it a little bit. There are some detail views that give us the information we need about these little bosses that stick out the sides. And we also have an annotation here that says wall thickness 3, which is usually a good clue that you're going to have to use a shell. And whenever you use a shell, it's really important to remember that a shell will try and shell all of the features that are there at that point in the model's creation. So these kind of circular features at the back and these rectangular bosses around the edges are things that we don't want to be included in that shell process. So it's important that we create the main part of this, which I think will be from a loft first, so a mixture of probably an extrusion and a loft. And then after we've done that, we shell that part and then we add on these bosses. Now there's also a couple of symmetrical features, like these posts at the back are symmetrically arranged, as are these bosses. So if we're clever and we start our first sketch so that it's dead on our origin and it's centered, we should be able to use our origin work planes to use the mirror tool to copy those features from top to bottom and side to side, hopefully reducing the amount of time that we need to take to do it. It's not going to make a huge difference, but everything that helps might as well. So let's start quickly. We're going to start with this 180 by 90 profile here for the front, and then you'll see that that extends 10 millimeters back where it's straight before the loft kind of occurs before it goes back to this back surface. So in my part file here, I'm going to start my sketch. I'm going to think about the orientation of it. So I want it to be on the front plane here. And there's a kind of weird quirk with Inventor is that sometimes it flips that on its side, but it hasn't today, so that's fine. And a good way to get it centered is to create a 2-point rectangle, which means that we can click on the center and then click out here defining the sizes, which is 180 by 90. So let's say 180 by 90. This just means that that front surface is dead center over my origin. Now when we've got that, we'll just extrude it 10 millimeters. And it won't matter hugely which direction, but I'll make it project backwards so that that's on the plane here. And that's that first little bit. So the back of that, the back surface of that is going to form the face upon which we will basically create our first sketch or first profile for the loft. And the second profile for the loft is back here 60 from the front. So that means it has to have a plane which is offset 50 from the back face of that first extrusion. So if we go back here, I'm going to create a new plane. Here we go. And we're going to offset that by 50. Yep. I'm going to start our sketch on this plane here. And we want a rectangle which is aligned with this top edge of that front surface there. So we want to make sure that we're getting a snap dot so that we can snap onto it. And if we aren't, we can use the project geometry tool, project that line, and we can always choose that line. So we can just select it and then make it a construction line. So it won't form part of the actual profile. It'll just let us snap onto it. Now, it's probably actually easier here to use, well, it doesn't really make much difference. We'll use a center point rectangle. A 2-point rectangle would work fine. But I don't want to snap onto the center point here because I want to be able to position this and dimension it so that it doesn't think its center is here, which is what it'll do otherwise. So here we're going to give that a dimension in that direction of, let's have a look here, 90. It says it's 90 wide. So we'll just hide that, 90. You'll see it's kind of nudged itself off center anyway, but that's no big deal. We can sort that out. And it's 45 high. So mention that. And to get this back on center, we could probably just use our constraints here. So we just constrain the center of that to the center. So we're using a vertical constraint to constrain those 2 points. So now that we've got that back profile, we simply need to create a profile on here, which we should be able to do just by starting a sketch on it, and then using the project geometry tool, or what we should call project edge, but we can call it project geometry. And I'm going to make this work plane. I'm just going to right click on it and make it invisible now, so I don't need to see it. We can now do our loft from this profile here to this. In fact, you probably don't actually need to do a sketch and identify the profile. I think you can just do it with the face of the surface. Sorry, the face of the feature. But either way, it gets us to where we need to be. So we've now got that. I'm going to just make that sketch invisible because we don't need to be able to see it. And so if you ever want to check things, it's not a bad idea just to use the measure tool, which you can use M to select, and you can just check some obvious sizes, like that one's got to be 60. So we know that that's 60. We could go around and check the sizes just to make sure, but I know they're right, so I'm not going to bother with that. Now, the next thing we need to do is we need to do our shell before we add these other features. So we're going to use our shell tool. We're going to select that front face to be removed, and we're going to define the wall thickness as 3. Having done that, we can start adding these other features that need to go on. So we'll start with these cylindrical things at the back here. And what we'll do is we will just start off with a circle. It's not going to matter hugely where we place this just now. I'm just going to add it so it's kind of tangent to that curve. And this is going to represent the center, like the middle hole, which has got a diameter of 6. So we'll dimension that 6. And if it pops away, if it's not constrained to the tangent, we can use the tangent constraint to just grab that and constrain it there so it knows it has to be. But I think it picked that up already when I was creating it. We then need to add the dimension to position the center of this from the side. So the position of this from the, well, it's actually from the middle. So I guess we could infer it from the end. If this is, what is it? 90 wide in total, that's going to be 45 to there. So that's going to be 25 from the outside edge, because that's just an easier point to dimension from. But it doesn't really matter, you can dimension it from the center. So we'll just do a dimension for the center of this to there. We're going to make that, what did I say, 25. And then make our second circle, which is going to give you the outside part of the profile. And if you look back, we'll see that the radius 4 is because it's not a full circle. So it's got R4, which means if we're adding a diameter here, we'd want that to be 8. And we'll have this extra bit left over, but we don't need to worry about that because it's only a millimeter sticking in. So it's actually just going to get lost inside the 3mm thickness of the wall. So we don't need to trim that away. So we can finish the sketch and extrude that, because it always makes sense to, if we're going to use the mirror tool, to do that with the feature rather than the sketch. And we are going to just do a distance, and we could either define the distance by going 2 and then clicking the edge that we want it to go to, or we could just go in here and see how far it goes down. It says here 45. So 45. Oops. So allow me not to change the direction. There we go. And now if we go back to our origin, we should be able to make that plane visible in the center, so we'll be able to mirror that feature and use that plane to mirror it. And that saves a little bit of work. And we'll leave that visible because we'll use that again when we come to do the bosses at the sides. So down here, this rectangular boss is 10 up and down the way. It's obviously 10 side to side because we can see it matches the 10 there, and it's 3 deep. So its position is 40 down from the top edge. So I'm just going to start a sketch on this face here. And we're just going to draw a rectangle, probably easier to do a 2-point rectangle here. And we'll just specify that it's got to be 10 by, I think we said it was 10 by 10, wasn't it? Yeah, it's 10 by 10, so 10 by 10. And then we'll dimension corner at the top to the top edge here. Try and get it right. Try that again. Actually, we can just grab that surface there. And 40, so we're going to specify 40 millimeters. Finish, extrude, 3, enter. And then we'll just mirror that across that central plane that we've got. And then we will do the same thing with that plane there. So we're just going to make that one visible so we can use it when we do the same one on the top. Start our sketch. I'll actually do it in the bottom because it's already got this kind of 10 millimeter wide surface. Makes it easier to tell that it's right. And we could do this as a 2-point or a 3-point rectangle, it doesn't really matter. Dimension it correctly. Okay, I accidentally snapped that onto the wrong thing when I created it, so I'll just do it and we'll just make it again. So 10 by 10. And we could position it in a couple of different ways, but we'll maybe just do horizontal constraint between that and that pops it bang in the middle. And once again, extrude 3 millimeters, and then we can use that plane to mirror it across. So that feature, that plane, and that's it. We can just make these planes invisible now because we don't need them to be seen. And so now we've got our object. As I said before, you could go back and you could use your measure tool, which is M shortcut, to just check some of the dimensions and make sure that you've not made a silly mistake. I'm quite happy that I've done that all correctly. And looking back over this, there are no other features that I've missed, so that part's finished.